the sock smoker of the Farangers Dam, being an account of the Trowl that dwelt beneath the road dam before the great storm, a chronicle of the shattered seas, set down in the old book of histories and horrors gathered through the ages. Inis, Quetho Nemnathu. Island, island, what is thy name? What is thy name? Yena Hnecco, I am Hnecco. Imna Mathinas, Ea Hnecco, my name is Hnecco. And just so, in the foremothers and forefathers' Forlornian tongue, this island of the Priadanian people was called Hnecco. Hnecco was reckoned among the Necker Landiana, the necklands or napelands, those narrow masses of earth where land drew itself thin between waters, like the neckfold of some resting creature. And this name suited the land well. For Hnecco lay long and low between seas, and in its northern reaches the ground spread into a wet, sodden carpet of coastal plain and heathland, broken by frail nest points and slender land bindings, where the waters pressed inward from either side. Because of this, the first map makers took their word from that place and began to call such lands necklands, after Hnecco itself. Thus it became the naming father of its own kind. It was upon this Hnecco, first of the napelands in name, that the Farangers Damway and the Dimling Damway were raised. These most notable earthworks, which upon the elder charts show themselves as narrow swellings cast across the drowned mouths of the sea, were raised, as is well believed, for the easing of passage between the scattered settlements of that coast. For in the elder days, in the ploughing epochs, during the early eras of the 4th Aeon, when the fiefdoms of the Braigothians and Braigathians yet hewed firm earth from the clutch of wind and wave, there ruled Johann Anric the Younger, Duke of Sindra Castelia, master of those coasts. And he gave command that great earthworks be cast up across the inlets between Roika's Head and the Ness of Avaya, and over the inlet called the Gab of Dimling, thus binding water from water and winning land from the ancient dominion of the sea. So it is said. For in an old book of Hnecco's history, wherein are gathered the elder remembrances of that land, it is written thus, that from Sindra Castelia there ran the ancient road, the Oxen Way, leading over Dimling and unto the northern shore. And there were great damways set across both inlets of the sea, by which men, carts, and driven cattle might pass where once only water lay. And so it was in those years when the damways yet stood firm against tide and weather, that this road served as the oldest and surest bond between those distant villages, and many were the hooves and wheels that passed over their earthen crowns. No stone bridges, nor timber trestles, but road dams heaped up from clay, sod, timber, and packed sand, laid across the blackened waters like the spine of some buried and patient thing. No Kinglicarian highway were they, but scarcely 2 wagons broad. 4 hardened wheel ruts ran along their crown, and between them a thin seam of stubborn grass clung to the soil. Their flanks fell steep and raw into the waters on either side, sharp as burial mounds newly raised. In wet weather the clay turned slick and treacherous. In frost it hardened like bone. By day they served the living. By night they belonged to something older, a narrow path suspended between darknesses. There were no trees upon them, no lanterns, no railing, only wind moving low across the water and the long sound of unseen ripples striking earth. Before men began whispering, they called the reclaimed pond behind the Farangers Dam the lost land, and spoke only of the sea that had been driven back and of the earth that had been won. Yet in the passing of years, their speech altered. For beneath the rammed clay and timber bracings of that great damway, there lay a place unseen and unreckoned in the labours of men, and therein, though none yet knew it, something had begun to abide, listening in silence to the long and ceaseless speech of the waters above it. A dwelling not made by men, not raised by ducal command, but hollowed, and inhabited nonetheless. And in time, as such things must, men began to whisper of what abode there. They spoke of a Trowl of the unbegotten, and named it in fearful familiarity Socksmog, whom they knew as the sock smoker. And some said the name itself was older than the dam, and had waited in the marsh long before men heaped clay upon the water. For Socksmog was said to seize the unlucky who vanished upon that narrow crossing, and drag them down into his earthen chamber, and there to boil and feast and grow swollen upon their flesh. And when the flesh was spent, he would take their severed feet and roll their socks into smouldering coils, and smoke them beneath the wan sky, drawing into himself the bitter vapour of their mortal lives. Thus he fed not only upon their bodies, but upon their being. And whenever misfortune befell the farming folk of northern Hnecco, and whenever man or beast was lost upon that road without cry or trace, they spoke his name in lowered voice. Never cross the Farangers Dam alone upon a night of coal, the elders would say. And though their mouths formed smiles as they spoke it, their eyes did not follow. For in those eyes flickered something older than warning. They remembered, and their fathers had remembered before them. And thus began the first of the vanishings. The disappearance of Hendrik Hansaba. In the wither-eyes, what latter men call autumn, in the second yearing of the 55th yearliness, ATA, Altimaeras Athanaim, meaning, according to the Aalbeck-Nount's time-telling, there went forth an Erdman of stout reputation, Hendrik Hansaba, driving his cart toward the Farangers Dam. The cart was towed behind the woolhorn, a cumbersome creature with wide, splayed hooves made for wet ground and a single curved horn, its fleece heavy with the smell of peat and rain. Hendrik was a tenant farmer under ducal holding, and that year he meant to cut reeds from the newly stilled waters behind the Farangers Dam and to dig peat for winter fuel, honest labour fitting a man of the soil. Within his cart lay the instruments of that purpose, a long-handled scythe, a shovel of crude iron, 2 sacks for turf, and a small stoppered cask of ale against thirst and chill. He laboured long among the shallows, ankle deep in the unmoving water, and the slow hours passed without measure, as they do in lonely places where the wind speaks more often than men. Thus the light withdrew from the world unnoticed. When at last he turned his mind toward home, the gilderous sun had already descended beyond recall, and a dim and uncertain hour possessed the land. Desiring to reach Nerthebod, the northern settlement, before the full dominion of night, he chose the shorter way, across the Farangers Dam. His woolhorn, went unwillingly upon that narrow earthen spine, its wide hooves striking dull and hollow notes upon the hardened crown. And as they came unto the middle reach, where the dam swelled faintly upward, there crept forth from the waters a mist pale and thick as carded cloth, rising without sound and without wind. Then came a noise, a harsh, coarse coughing, as of lungs long unused to fresh air. The wool horn stopped, its ears drew back, its flanks shuddered beneath the harness. Jendrik spoke to it. It would not move. The mist thickened, and the coughing came again, closer, behind him. And though he did not wish it, and though some buried and ancestral faculty cried out against the knowing of it, still he turned his head and saw there rose from the dam's highest swelling a shape vast beyond reason, unfolding itself from the earth, as if it had always lain there, awaiting only the hour of its sharing. Its form was hunched and obscene, its surface raw and leathern and dried in dirt, like something flensed and yet living. And where its face inclined toward him, there burned two deep and clotted lights of ox blood, ember glowings set within a skull not shaped for the governance of mercy. For one suspended moment, no part of the world moved. Then Jendrik Hansaba cried out, and the mist and the coughing closed upon him. Of the waiting of his wife and the first entering of dread. That night, Jendrik Hansaba did not return. His wife, Elsina, set no worry upon it at first, for it was not unknown that a man might labour late in the witherrise and choose to sleep beneath a cart or cloak rather than drive a weary beast across darkened ground. She kept the hearth warm, she kept his portion covered, and she waited. The wool-horn stall stood empty. The night passed. The fire sank low. Still he did not come. In the grey hour before dawn, she went out and stood before the house and looked down the road that ran southward toward the Farangers Dam along the sloping hills. There was mist upon it. Nothing came. She returned inside and did not eat. When the sun had risen fully, and still there was no sign of him, she spoke of it to her brother, and her brother spoke of it to others. And before noon had passed, there were men walking the damway. They found the wool-horn first. It stood alone upon the far side, its fleece dark with sweat, its wide, splayed hooves sunk deep into the clay. It did not graze. It did not move. It only stood, lathered through and trembling beyond the soothing of men. The cart stood near it. The sacks lay spilled. The tools lay scattered where they had fallen. But Jendrik Hansaba was nowhere, nor was any mark of his passing found, save that the earth upon the highest swelling of the dam lay faintly disturbed, as though something had been drawn down into it. And in the days that followed, many upon northern Hnecco spoke no word of it aloud, for in their hearts they feared the reason why. The brother returned and told his sister, Jendrik's wife, of what had been found and of what had not. She did not weep. She only nodded once and closed her door. And from that day, she did not wait by the road again, but lived behind shuttered windows and locked doors. After that, something settled upon the people of Hnecco. They crossed the Farangers Dam more quickly. They spoke less while upon it, and each man, though he said nothing, knew that the earth, or the mist, had opened once and taken one of their own, and might take another. Upon the damned water. It was 13 years later, and 13 years before the great storm, that there were 5 village lads of Nerthebod, Mokolia, Pedrin, Jand, Andrisco, and Logrist Trembletraus. Of these, Logrist was the youngest, and the least possessed of that reckless boldness which so often passes for courage in the untried. The tale of Socksmog the Socksmoker had grown among them in the telling, as such tales do, and each new vanishing laid another stone upon that rising wall of worry, feeding alike upon their fear and upon their pride. In time it seemed to them a thing intolerable that such a presence should dwell so near and remain unlooked upon. Thus they resolved among themselves that they would go out upon the damned water and behold the truth of it with their own eyes, whether to prove the creature real, or else to strike dead the dread of it in their hearts. So they borrowed a small rowing boat, and upon a late afternoon, when the light had begun already to pale toward evening, they rowed out from the reed-grown shore. They brought with them rye bread, smoked sausage wrapped in cloth, and a jug of strong brewed beer, that they might warm their courage against the coming night. They cast over the side a heavy stone, bound fast with rope, and so made anchor within sight of the dam, that long and narrow rise of earth which lay black and still against the darkening sky. There they settled themselves and waited. At first they spoke loudly and with boast, for the nearness of the place excited them. "If he shows himself," said Mokolia, who was broad of shoulder and eager of cruelty, "we shall bind him fast and drag him behind a mule to the mill." "Aye," said Andrisco, "and there we shall crush his fingers in the wheel until he learns what it is to bring sorrow upon our folk." "And after," said Pedrin, "we shall take him to Sindra Castellir, and from there to the Bregoffion himself, and he shall be put to death proper as any other murderer." They laughed at this. Only Logrist said nothing, forcing a thin smile lest their jests turn upon him. He sat gripping an oar, watching, waiting. Afternoon passed, then evening, and their talking was stilled by the silence of the land. The last light failed, and darkness rose from the water and gathered about them. In time they grew hungry, and ate their bread and sausage. They drank of their beer, and as the drink took hold, their tongues loosened. "Who would believe us," Jand asked at length, "if we saw something here this night?" "All would believe," said Andrisco, though without conviction. "But if we see nothing," Logrist said, and there was in his voice no mockery, only a small and earnest hope. Andrisco gave a rude scoff. "Then we shall say that we did," he said, "and none shall know the lie. Ha ha ha." The others laughed with him, but Logrist did not laugh. Midnight came, and nothing had come with it. No shape stirred upon the dam. No sound, save the rustling of reeds, broke the stillness. No other breath disturbed the air. At last Mokolia spat into the black water. "You were right, Logrist," he said, and knuckled his shoulder. "There is nothing here but mud and old wives' fear." And at this Logrist felt a great and quiet relief, and gave the oar he had been clenching to one of the others. They hauled up the anchor stone, and turned the boat toward shore and began rowing home. The oars dipped and rose in measured strokes, wood knocking hollow against water, the thole pins creaking softly as though the boat itself murmured unease. They had gone but a short distance when it came. A sound. Behind them. A cough. Low, wet, and possessed of a depth of mortal ruin that no living throat should have contained. The oars faltered. Then came another sound. A voice. Dry and knotted, filled with a loathsome satisfaction. None could say what words it spoke, for the sound alone emptied the mind of meaning. They turned, and there, upon the crest of the dam, they beheld it, not clearly, only a darker darkness against the night. And within that darkness, a small red ember, glowing, fading, glowing and fading. "Row," Andrisko whispered. No one moved. "Row!" he cried. Then terror seized them all at once, and they fell upon the oars in wild and senseless flight. The boat lurched and rocked beneath their desperate strokes. Oars bit the water wildly. In the chaos, one swung too hard. The wood struck Lorgrist square upon the brow. He fell without a cry, backwards, into the black water. None saw him fall, for fear had stripped them of reason and left only the blind and animal need to flee. The boat scraped the shore. They leapt out before it had steadied and ran without speaking, each to his own door, and none looked behind him. And that night, across the dark water, the reed cranes ceased their calling, and the marsh fox lifted its head from the sedge. For they heard it, a dry and choking scoggering, harsh, broken and low, carrying over the dam and out across the marsh. It was not loud, yet it endured, and no creature moved toward it. Only in the morning after, when the sun shone kindly and the boys' fear thinned beneath its light, did they reckon their number, and found themselves at 4 instead of 5. Of Lorgrist Trembletraus, and the letter found thereafter. The vanishing of Lorgrist Trembletraus was not as the others, for when the boys fled and left him in the shallows before the damway, Soxmog did not at once devour him. The Trowl came forth from his unseen passage beneath the earth and waded into the black and silent water, and there he found the boy where he drifted, half submerged and unmoving in the sedge. And he took him, not in haste, but with dreadful care, as if not to hurt his harvest. He drew him down into the hidden chamber beneath the dam, into that low and earthen burrow whose walls wept with moisture. There he laid the boy upon the cold soil and waited. In time, Lorgrist awoke. He woke not to light, but to suffocation, to a darkness so entire it seemed less the absence of sight than its burial. The air lay thick with peat reek and rot, pressing close against his mouth and nostrils, so that he could taste the earth itself upon his tongue. And then he heard the dry coughing. It rose from the darkness behind him, low and splintered, as though some ancient chest laboured against a body long befouled by smoke and earth. At first it seemed no more than the ruinous rattle of breath ill kept, yet the coughing did not cease. It gathered, it thickened, and within it there began to shape itself the burden of a voice. There, little trembler. The rasp came again, then stilled. You must wake now. A pause. For if you do not, I shall eat you. Lorgrist stirred. Before him, in the dark, 2 ember glows opened, watching. Seeing that the boy yet trembled and could not fix his sight upon the place wherein he lay, Socksmog made for himself a lesser light. From the earthen wall of that noisome chamber, he drew forth a black and tar-slick root, thick as a man's thumb, as though nourished by the corruption of that place. He set its end near the boy's face. Then the troll brought together the nails of his thick and blistered fingers, not nails as men bear them, but flint-like splinters, sharp and ashen, grown from his very flesh, as though stone had thrust outward where horn should have been. He pressed them together. There came a rasping, grit-laden crack. A spark leapt forth and fell upon the root. The thing caught not with open flame, but with a low and inward glow, as though it consumed itself unwillingly. Bitter, resinous smoke rose and clung to the throat, and by that dim and guttering ember, the chamber was revealed. And Lorgrist saw. He saw the low, sweating roof of packed clay. He saw the narrowness of the place, like the inside of a grave. And he saw Socksmog. Its hide was bare and leathern, bereft of hair, save for certain hard and meaty filaments that hung from its scalp like rootlets drawn from clay. About its neck there hung a corded garland of shriveled noses, darkened by smoke and strung upon sinew, stiff as horn. Some were small, some were broad. All were taken. Lorgrist's stomach turned, yet terror pressed words from him. Why? He whispered, his voice scarcely his own. Why do you eat men? You will be cast into the hollow homes of the Yonderlands if you go on so. Socksmog regarded him. You take the eggs from the hen, it said. You boil them before they quicken. It leaned nearer. Why then am I called monster? Lorgrist had no answer. You eat the children of wing and hoof, the Trowl murmured. I eat the children of men, whether young or old. Its ember eyes narrowed. Between you and me, between folk and nature, there is but one difference. You weep when it is your own. We don't. And in that silence Lorgrist understood that mercy would not dwell there. Yet Socksmog desired knowledge before meat. He told the boy he would not eat him. He would let him go. If only he would answer. Why had they come? Why had men begun seeking him in the night? Why had his long silence been disturbed? And Lorgrist, young, alone and shaken beyond strength, told him everything. He told of whispers, of vanished folk, of boys made bold by ale and pride, of fear grown restless, of men seeking proof. Socksmog listened. Long he listened. Then he bade the boy write. Before him he placed Lorgrist's own boot, taken from him in the water, and into the boy's trembling hands he gave a strip of leathern parchment, foul and yellowed, stiffened by damp and older handling, its grain not wholly like sheep nor calf. Write it, said Socksmog. Write what you have told me, all of it. Lorgrist obeyed. He wrote of the chamber, of the root light, of the questions asked, of the answers given, of the thing that dwelt beneath the dam. He believed he would walk again beneath the open sky. When he had finished and placed the rolled parchment within the hollow of the boot, Socksmog regarded him for a long moment. Then the promise broke, for the Trowl was not bound by the words of men. Truth and falsehood alike were but tools to him. He took a chokehold on Lorgrist, and he devoured him. Yet Lorgrist was not forgotten, not in the slightest. In the red morning glow of the day that followed, the fathers of the boys came down to the waters behind the Farangers Dam. There they saw, drifting slowly toward the shore, a single boot, and within it, a letter. They knew the boot, and they brought the letter unto the old shriveman. It was not writ upon common paper, but upon that same strip of leathern parchment. The shriveman read it once, and again, and yet again. He spoke little for many days thereafter, but in time he caused its contents to be made known among the people, and when they heard it spoken aloud, they grew wiser, for now their fear had words. And many who heard the letter afterward wished they had not. Yet Socksmog grew wiser also. From Lorgrist's words, he learned the measures of men's fear. He learned that too many vanishings among one folk would draw wrath. He learned the scent of those who belonged, and those who passed through. Thereafter, he preyed not only upon those of northern Hnecco, whose absence might swiftly be reckoned, but upon strangers and wandering souls whose smell betrayed them as belonging elsewhere. Thus he fed, yet he did not wholly conceal himself, for he allowed the letter to be found, and in this he planted not certainty, but dread, that men might fear him more than they sought him. When the leathern letter of Lorgrist had been read aloud by the old shriveman before the gathered folk, and its words passed from mouth to mouth across the parishes of northern Hnecco, there arose among them a dread mingled with a fevered and unwholesome curiosity. For though they feared what lay beneath the Farangers Dam, yet they desired to see some mark of it with their own waking eyes. Thus, in the days that followed, many went out upon the dam in the full light of day, when the sun stood high and no shadow lay long upon the earth. Farmers, fishermen, carters, and even certain grey-headed elders, whose fathers had warned them from that place, walked its length from end to end. They trod the crown of the damway slowly. They paused at the highest swelling described in Lorgrist's hand. They struck the earth with iron-shod staffs. They listened. They sought a hollow. But they found nothing. The ground lay firm beneath them. No yielding answered their tread. No chamber betrayed itself below. Only clay and turf and stone, as any other dam might hold. Some laughed in relief and said that the fears of men were but wind and fancy. Others did not laugh. For though the earth showed no sign, they marked that no bird would settle upon that highest rise, nor would horse or ox step there willingly, but shied and rolled their eyes, and must be driven forward with rain and curse. And when at last they departed that place, each man did so with a haste he did not name, and none cared to be the last remaining upon the dam. From that time onward, though many spoke of the letter, and many more claimed boldness in daylight, none willingly lingered there when evening fell. For whether hollow or no, whether truth or delusion, The Farangers Dam had become a place remembered with the back turned, and beneath it, if the letter spoke true, something remembered them also. The old Shriveman. The old Shriveman read Lorgrist's letter many times after that, and in his reading he grew grave. For the words within spoke not merely of a beast, but of a dwelling beneath the dam, and of a mind that reasoned its hunger. He continued to warn the folk of northern Hnecco to tread that way with reverence and fear. And in the years that followed, he kept the letter within the Stone-Kirk Temple, folded among the parish records, and would sometimes take it out in the dimness and read it again. But age bent him, and in a short time he died. Before his burial, he placed the letter into the keeping of the new Shriveman, who had come north to dwell in the old Stone-Kirk by the marsh edge. "Read it," he said, "and remember. The Bale Pyre's Eve." 1 year later, they were kept upon Hnecco an ancient observance, older than the damways and older than the temple towers that watched it from afar. The people named it the Bale Pyre's Eve, and upon that night they kindled their great fires upon hill and shore, not for warmth nor signal, but for relinquishment. It was held among them that upon this evening the past might be given over to flame, not only those things which could be held in the hand, worn garments, broken tools, letters never answered, and tokens grown heavy with memory, but also those burdens which had no substance save in the mind. Regret, grief, shame, and unquiet thought were spoken silently and committed to the rising heat, that the fire might consume what the soul alone could not release. Thus the bale pyres burned with more than wood. They burned with years. They burned with lives. Across the heathland they stood upon the low hills above Dimling, and along the wind-bent rises beyond Nerthebod, each flame bowing in the night wind. From afar they appeared as fallen stars set gently upon the earth, bright points strewn across the darkened land, as though some fragment of heaven had descended and taken rest upon the grass. Their light clung close to the ground. Beyond their reach the island lay swallowed in blackness. So it was in the years after Yendrik Hansaba was lost upon the Farangers Dam that his widow, Elsina, came to the bale pyre above Nerthebod. The newly arrived Shrivemen stood there also, and many of the parish, their faces lit from beneath in wavering amber. The wood leaned and cracked in the wind, and smoke wandered low across the earth. One by one, the villagers stepped forward. Some cast garments, some letters, some broken tools. Elsina came with tears and a small bundle wrapped in plain cloth. From it she drew Yendrik, her husband's, work shirts, worn thin at the collar and stiff with the salt of his labour. She cast them into the flame. They curled, blackened, collapsed into ash. She stood watching until nothing remained. And those nearest her said she gave to the fire that night more than cloth, the long waiting, the unanswered question, and the memory of a man who had stepped upon the dam and never returned. At length she stepped back, and the Shriveman lifted his voice in prayer. But the Shriveman who stood there that night was not the same who had once read aloud the leathern letter before these very folk, nor the man who had known their fathers and their fathers' fathers. That elder had long since parted. He had taken what the people called the last journey to the yonder lands, and was laid in the earth beside his forebears. He had served the parish since his youth, and many said he had grown old with the dam itself, that he had watched its clay settle and its reeds take root as one watches the slow aging of a familiar face. In his later years he had spoken less. Of the letter he had read often. Of the dam he had spoken seldom. Some held that he carried to his grave more than age alone. After his passing, there came from the southern priory a younger man appointed to the cure of souls in that remote parish. He was learned. He was diligent. He had not yet been weathered by the long winds of Hnecco. He knew the words of doctrine. He did not yet know the silences of the land. With him came his daughter. She had not been born upon the island either, nor raised among its marshes and salt-bitten shores. The distances were strange to her, the stillness stranger still. Her father heard the common talk of roads, of tides, of failing harvests and shifting sand. But of the dam he heard little, and what little he heard he weighed as rustic superstition. Thus the older fears were not pressed upon him. Thus the older warnings were not spoken aloud. Thus what had once been remembered plainly began instead to fade into habit and half-silence. And the daughter, newly come among them, did not know. The Shriveman's daughter and the unlit ground. There was upon her also a strange affliction. Her eyes did not welcome fire. Where others found comfort in flame, she found only a slow and piercing pain. Bright light struck her sight like a wound, and she turned from it as one turns from accusation. Even the smallest candle, when watched too long, left behind it a scar of brightness that lingered upon her vision. Yet upon that bale pyre's eve, she stood first beside her father at the great bale pyre in Nerthebod. The villagers gathered in wide and murmuring circles. Their faces rose and fell in amber light, their speech low and softened by the night. She moved among them quietly, offering greeting here and there, to the fisher whose hands were split by salt, to the old woman who leaned upon her stick, to children clutching their mother's sleeves. They were, she thought, a gentle people, rough in speech perhaps, weathered by wind and labour, yet kind in a way that had no boast in it. She saw in them no malice, only endurance. And it seemed to her then that whatever grief they cast into the flames that night, they did so not in bitterness, but in hope. She walked from one circle of fire to the next, between the bale pyres set upon the low hills, carrying soft words and listening where she could. Smoke drifted across her path, sparks rose and vanished. Yet the nearer she came to the flames, the more her sight pained her. At last she turned from the brightness and sought the dimmer edges of the heath, thinking to visit those who stood farther off from the greater crowd, or to look in upon the smaller fires where folk kept quieter vigil. She passed beyond the last of the gathered circles, beyond the last murmur of voices, into the unlit ground. There the night received her without injury. The wind combed slowly over the grass. Behind her the bale pyres burned like fallen stars laid gently upon the hills. Before her lay the darker reach of land. She walked without worry, guided only by the cool breath of the sea and the quiet contour of the earth beneath her feet. It rose before her then, a long and patient mound of earth, its crown swallowed in shadow, the Farangers Damway. She might have turned back then, but she saw something. Far out upon the dam where no man had stood that night, there flickered a small and unsteady light. She paused. It was no bale pyre. Too small, too solitary. It wavered, and its glow was of a deeper and more secret colour than the fires she had left behind. She thought at first that some late wanderer had gone there to kindle his own private burning, some grief too intimate to share among others. She began to walk toward it. The grass gave way to the hardened earth of the dam's approach. The wind fell away, and as she drew nearer, she heard a melody not belonging to men, thick of throw yet pleased, and wrong in its cadence. Socksmog, Socksmog, I am the smoker of sock and lot. Socksmog, Socksmog. There, just there, sat a gross shape upon the dam, and it sang to itself. In one clawed hand it held a severed human foot, pale and slack, the sock reeved from it. With the other, it cradled a tight coil of cloth, a sock rolled like a little cigar, its tip faintly alive with a dull red heat. Then the ember waned. The thing made a small motion with its fingers. Its nails met. A harsh, grit-laden crack. Two sparks sprang out and fell upon the rolled sock. The glow returned, inward and sullen. For a moment she did not understand what she beheld. Then her gaze moved from the foot to the missing shape upon it, to the smouldering coil between its claws, and the knowledge settled in her, cold and complete. The thing was smoking the garment it had stripped from the dead. About its neck hung a string of darkened shapes, and as it lifted the smoking coil to its mouth again, she saw clearly what those shapes were. Noses, blackened, shriveled, strung like beads of prayer. It drew in the smoke. Then it plucked one of the noses between its claws and held it close to the smouldering tip, as though letting it breathe. "Can you scent it?" it murmured to the dead thing. "That is your winter. That is your summer. That is the smell of what you were." And then it laughed, a low and choking scoggering. In that moment she understood. This thing had sat upon the dam while these gentle people cast their grief into flame and sought peace. It fed, it mocked, it profaned. Yet she felt no fear. She felt anger, a rising and righteous anger that burned hotter within her than any bale pyre upon the hills. For upon this night, when all sought cleansing, this thing remained, remaining, feeding, desecrating. Her eyes, which could not bear the honest fires of men, did not turn from its ember glow. She stood before it, and the Trowl beheld her in return, neither moved, neither fled. Only the smoke slithered, crawling from the sock coil and clinging to the dam like breath that did not wish to leave. At length she turned and went back the way she had come. The wind returned too, and the bale pyres burned on. She did not speak of what she had seen to those gathered that night. She returned to the parsonage and shut herself within. There, in the small chamber where the light was kept low, she knelt. She prayed long, with a stern and deliberate fervour. She prayed that what she had seen be cast down, that the profanation be ended, that the land be cleansed. The years of knowing. After the night upon Bale-Pyre's Eve, when the Shriveman's daughter beheld the sock-smoker seated upon the Farangers Dam and heard its satisfied song, there came upon her a change which none in the parish could fail to mark, though few could name its cause. She spoke first to her father of what she had seen. The man who had spent his life in the keeping of souls listened with a grave and troubled countenance. He said only that the adversary walked in many forms where men had wronged the world in pride, and that the enemy delighted in places where earth had been bent to human will. He forbade her ever to walk that road again. And for a time he himself went down to the dam by day, carrying relic and book, and spoke aloud the words of banishment over its earth. He scattered blessed salt upon the crown of the mound. He set sprigs of consecrated herb along its path. He prayed in a firm voice against whatever might dwell beneath. Yet nothing answered him. No voice rose. No earth stirred. The clay lay mute beneath his hand, and nothing changed. But the daughter knew that it remained. From that summer onward, she grew restless in spirit, and her sleep was troubled. Often she woke before dawn, certain she had heard coughing carried faintly across the fields, a low and splintered sound, as though some ancient chest laboured against smoke and earth, though no other ear marked it. At table she would fall silent, and when her father asked her thought, she would say only, "The sea is not finished with the land it has lost." She would not go near Dimling again. She would not look toward the dam. Yet her thoughts returned to it always. She kept her prayers. Not gently, but with the same stern and deliberate fervour she had first known that night. And she continued also in the quiet errands of the foremothers, the songs at dawn, the washing of thresholds with salt water, the binding of plain thread in small and patient knots, the setting of blessed sprigs above the lintel and beneath the eaves. Some in the parish smiled at such things. Some did not. For there were others too who began to speak in hushed and uncertain tones of matters ill-favoured upon the island. Fishermen told of strange stillness upon the water, when wind moved elsewhere, but not there. Nets were found torn in ways no stone nor timber could account for. Once, in the low tide of autumn, a man claimed to have seen upon the black mud the print of something vast and man-shaped, yet wrong in its proportions, as though the earth itself had softened beneath its passing. And there were nights when dogs would not face the water. The old folk began again to speak words long set aside. They said that when the dam was first raised, and the sea thrust outward from the land, something had been pressed downward with it, and that it had not forgiven. As the years passed, the daughter of the Shriveman grew into womanhood, yet her dread did not lessen. Rather, it settled deeper within her, like a thorn grown into the flesh. Often she would stand at the Stonekirk Temple at evening, looking westward, though she could not see the Farangers Dam from there. She would listen, and sometimes, though she never spoke it aloud, she believed she heard far off and buried beneath the sound of wind and water, a dry, sloggering laughter and the smell of smog and smoulders. The Great Storm. That year in her womanhood, a great storm rose from the sea. The waters swelled beyond memory. Wind tore at earth and timber. The sea clawed at the Dimling damway and the Farangers Damway with unrelenting fury. Before dawn, the dams broke. The reclaimed marsh vanished beneath the raging tide. The earthen spines split and were carried away into the hungry deep. Thus the people of Nerthobod came to say that the Falernians had heralded them at last, that they had sent the storm to drown Soxmog in his burrow and bury his foul hearth, smothered in the cold and lightless deep, where no root might smoulder and no breath endure. When only marsh and memory remained. In the years after the great storm, no further vanishings were spoken of in northern Hnecco. The damways were gone, the swellings of earth were taken, and the chamber beneath, if chamber there had been, lay drowned beneath silt and returning tide. Many said then that Soxmog, the sock smoker, had perished in that undoing, and for a time the people believed it. The marsh spread again across the drowned land. Reeds took root where carts had once passed. The road was not rebuilt. Thus the works of men were unmade, and only marsh and memory remained. Yet time did not cease. Above the island the heavens went on in their silent reckonings. Clouds passed, and the three suns traced its slow courses over the land, measuring out the seasons and the years, until such measures lost their meaning at the frail boundaries of men. Yet the turning did not halt. It went onward, and onward still. For it is not given to men to know what things may be fetched between those turnings, in the blind interval between one age and the next, while the great motions of the world continue above us, and we below mistake their keeping for our own. And in certain seasons, when the mist lies low upon that marsh and the sea inlets, and the wind falls away to nothing, there are those who say they have seen, far out among the reeds, a thread of smoke, a single ember, glowing, fading, glowing and fading. For the marsh keeps what it is given, as though something beneath the marsh remembers still the taste of smouldering sock,